Coming up on Jerusalem Dateline, festive decorations in the Arab quarter of the Old City as Jerusalem prepares for Ramadan. The battle continues over Benjamin Netanyahu's efforts to bring about judicial reform. And the stakes get higher in the corporate war on free speech, while Iranians flee by the thousands to the closest refuge for democracy and human rights. All this and more coming up on this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. The Muslim holiday of Ramadan is quickly approaching, a month of fasting and prayer considered one of the 5 pillars of Islam. Individuals observing Ramadan will fast daily and then break their fast at sundown with a meal called iftar. Followers of Islam in Jerusalem are preparing the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound for what thousands who will be coming to pray. On Saturday, residents decorated the alleys in the Arab quarter of Jerusalem's Old City with lanterns.
I hope that this year will be a good year for everyone and that there will be no problems for the visitors. Visitors like to pass through 2 gates, Lion and Huta, especially this gate because there are a lot of decorations and it's different.
Ramadan and the weeks leading up to it have historically been a time of unrest in Israel, and this year has been no different. Tensions are running high between Israelis and Palestinians, and many fear more violence as Ramadan starts. The latest terror attack involved on the shooting of an Israeli, Daniel Stern, and his wife in the city of Huwara. Although injured in the head, Stern managed to shoot back at his attacker and wound him. Stern had served in the U.S. Marines and is said to be recovering well. His 2 children in the backseat of his car at the time of the incident were not hurt. Well, I hosted a special CBN News prayer event for peace in Israel during the month of Ramadan. To watch it, go to cbnnews.com or the CBN News YouTube channel. By far, one of the biggest hot-button issues here in Israel is judicial reform, an attempt by Benjamin Netanyahu's government to limit the power of the Supreme Court. Supporters say the reform will address what they see as overreach by the judiciary. Opponents say it will undermine Israel's democracy by eroding the government's systems of checks and balances. I spoke with Israeli lawyer David Benjamin to give you a breakdown on what judicial reform is and why it's so controversial. David Benjamin, thanks for joining us on Jerusalem Dateline. Tell us a little bit of the background. Why do people thought there was a need for judicial reform in the first place?
Chris, Israel has no written constitution. All the arrangements we have right now are an interesting mix of laws and legal precedents. There's no actual written constitution, and there's a lot of question marks up in the air about how things are actually supposed to work. What has really brought about this demand for reform is the fact that much of what we consider our unwritten constitution today was developed by the Supreme Court itself. One could say because of the vacuum that existed, but how exactly the relationship between the Supreme Court and the legislator, the Knesset, should work, that's been developed quite activistically, some say, by the judges of the court itself. And there's a lot of criticism about the fact that perhaps the court has gone too far in its activism, has allowed itself to review actions which in other countries would not be reviewed typically by the Supreme Court. In other words, the idea is that the Supreme Court has too much power relative to the legislator.
And so what are the reforms that are being suggested right now, David?
So the reforms being suggested right now, first of all, are to severely limit the power of the court to strike down laws of the legislature, of the Knesset. It would require a very, very large majority of judges in the court, first of all, to be able to do so. And secondly, the Knesset, the legislator, would be able to overrule the decision of the court with a simple majority of Knesset members. That means 61 out of 120. Another aspect of the reform is that the coalition wants to be able to appoint the judges in a committee which has an automatic majority for the governing coalition. And that also is very contentious. There are some other aspects to the reform, but those are the main points.
Now, is that why there is many demonstrations on the street right now? Is that the opposition to these reforms?
Well, many people feel, a lot of people think there is place to talk about reform. And certainly because we have no constitution and because things have developed the way they have, certainly there certainly is a need for wide-ranging discussion and some kind of constitution. The criticism, and a very deep criticism that people have, is that the reforms currently on the table are just far too extreme. They basically throw the baby out with the bathwater. They completely neutralize the Supreme Court. Instead of having a Supreme Court which acts as a check and balance on the legislator and vice versa, you basically have a system where the Supreme Court is eviscerated in terms of its ability to review legislation. And so this is why many people are very concerned about the fate of our democracy going forward. As I say, a lot of people would accept some kind of reform, but not in the extreme form that it's being pushed through right now.
Final question, David. Do you see any room for compromise between the two sides right now?
Well, if you ask me, it would be quite easy to come to a compromise. I think there are quite obvious compromises that can be made. The problem is that politics very much stand in the way of moving forward. Unfortunately, it's very much about individuals. It's about Benjamin Netanyahu, who's the prime minister, those who are sort of for him and those who are against him. And that is really preventing any progress being made forward right now. I certainly hope that will change and change soon.
David, thanks for joining us on Jerusalem Dateline. Coming up, a chilling look at measures taken by one organization to censor speech and target conservative companies where it hurts. In these days of political correctness, a new movement is underway to censor certain speech by labeling it disinformation. The goal is to convince companies to stop advertising on conservative websites. Dale Hurd has the story.
Companies are being steered away from spending advertising dollars with conservative news websites by what's been labeled a stealth blacklisting operation. The British Global Disinformation Index says its mission is to disrupt the business model of disinformation. To reduce disinformation, we need to remove the financial incentive to create it. The index has the potential to economically strangle some conservative websites. Investigative reporter Gabe Kaminsky uncovered the operation for the Washington Examiner.
GDI compiles a secretive dynamic exclusion list, essentially a blacklist, of the websites that it determines to be the biggest purveyors of disinformation online.
The Global Disinformation Index lists the 10 riskiest websites for companies to advertise with. All are conservative or libertarian, including the New York Post, Reason, the Daily Wire, and the American Conservative. They're accused of things like lack of transparency, bias, or omissions of pertinent information. We asked the senior editor at the American Conservative, Rod Dreher, for his response to the claim his website is risky.
My response is, we are an opinion magazine. Of course we're biased. Liberal opinion magazines are biased too.
But no liberal or mainstream media websites are listed as risky by the index, which is funded by several foundations, including George Soros' Open Society Foundations, and even the U.S. government, through the National Endowment for Democracy. Or at least it was until members of Congress got wind and the funding was canceled. This is only the latest wave of cancel culture to hit conservatives, who have already been shadow banned, deplatformed, debanked, and even mentioned for deprogramming.
And the question is, how are we going to really almost deprogram these people?
As conservatives began to be banned from social media, they thought that at least they would be safe on their own websites. But the censors have followed. While Republicans in Congress are vowing to investigate the Global Disinformation Index, Dreher, the author of The Benedict Option, a strategy for Christians in a post-Christian nation, does not believe this censorship campaign will stop anytime soon.
Yeah, I don't think it ever will stop, because the other side, they're motivated by a religious fervor. They are fighting evil, and you can't tolerate evil. They have identified the enemy. The enemy are those who are so-called deplorables, including conservative Christians and others, who they will deem to be threats, and therefore they can be marginalized.
The recent issue of Rolling Stone magazine features an article called Why Cancel Culture is Good for Democracy. Stephen Sokup, author of The Dictatorship of Woke Capital, says corporate America is easy prey for programs like the Global Disinformation Index.
This is a continuation of a trend in American history of an elite ruling class that believes that they're, sort of the benevolent guardians who are taking care of the poor, stupid American people who don't understand what they really need and what they really want and what's really best for them.
In an attempt to fight back against corporate cancel culture, a conservative watchdog group called the 1792 Exchange recently released its corporate bias ratings. It rates more than 1,000 companies on their likelihood to cancel a contract or client or deny services based on a person's beliefs. And the future could see even more censorship. A Manhattan Institute study found that while the American public leans 2-to-1 in favor of free speech, most Americans under 30 favor censorship when free speech hurts certain groups.
Freedom of religion, freedom of association, all the First Amendment freedoms, they are overwhelmingly intolerant of these freedoms. They do not want to support free speech, freedom of religion, or anything like that if the exercise of those freedoms stands to hurt a vulnerable minority.
We invited the Global Disinformation Index to answer the charges made against it, but they did not respond. They're now being accused of spreading disinformation themselves for warning advertisers to blacklist news sites that blamed the COVID pandemic on a lab leak in China, a claim the FBI and the U.S. Department of Energy believe to be true. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Up next, Iranians migrating by the thousands to one of the only free and democratic countries in the region. Deadly protests, attacks on women, and rampant unrest have plagued Iran for months. These events are prompting some Iranians to seek refuge elsewhere, and a group of Christians in Armenia is preparing a place to receive them. CBN's Chuck Holton has the story.
A groundbreaking cultural shift is underway across Iran. Months of protests against the regime have been brutally repressed by police, leaving more than 500 dead. Hundreds of girls' schools have seen their students hospitalized in a wave of poisonings. All the fear and uncertainty has left many looking for an escape. Thousands are now fleeing north to one of the only free and democratic countries in the region, Armenia.
There are a lot of global geopolitical conflicts that are represented in this remote border crossing you see in Iran right behind me. You have Russia, which does a lot of trade with Iran. A lot of the weapons that end up in Ukraine may come through this area. And you also have Azerbaijan, which wants this corridor in order to reach Turkey and the West. And right in the middle of it all, you have this tiny country of Armenia, which is functioning as a safe spot for Christians and other Iranians who are fleeing persecution inside their country.
And then right here you see this river. It's called the Araks River. And the Araks River is basically the border between Armenia and Iran. And if you go a little farther to the west, it's the border also from Turkey and Armenia.
And this is the only border crossing between Iran and Armenia,
That's
right?
correct. This is the only border crossing that Iranians coming in, they can come into Armenia only at this spot. So it's illegal in Iran to proselytize. So as a Christian, you're not able to go to Iran legally to share the Christian faith. And you're not even allowed to have a Persian Bible. It's illegal to have the Bible in the Persian language. So what we've found is that the Persians come to Christian Armenia, and they're coming to look for what Christianity is. Find a church, find a Bible, ask questions, and because this is the only border crossing and that they're able to, we find that thousands pass every single day.
And how receptive are they to the gospel?
Those that are coming from Iran are so excited to meet a Christian and to listen. And in fact, we have seen many, hundreds have come to faith in Jesus Christ. It's just that they need to hear. They need to have someone that is a preacher, an evangelist, to teach them and show them that. and they're so eager to read a Bible as well, as they're not allowed to have those in Iran.
But the journey can be full of risk. This bus full of Iranians caught fire while ascending the treacherous mountain road en route to Armenia's capital, Yerevan. Fortunately, there were no injuries. Even still, greater concern to those coming here is that even after leaving Iran, their family and friends back home may be in danger.
I, myself, was beaten 4 years ago in Shiraz University because of hijab, because I took off my scarf. In Iran, women are, suffering a lot because there are a lot of rapes, a lot of harassment, and it is normal. It has been normal. No one understands that it is harassment, it is rape. No one understands it. They say it's normal. You're a woman, so you must obey.
As conflict in Iran persists, Jacob and his team are bracing for an increased number of refugees seeking shelter here. And while Armenia faces its own ongoing problems with Azerbaijan, more Russians and Ukrainians are arriving in the country, fleeing that ongoing conflict. And no matter where they hail from, Jacob and his team welcome all with open arms.
Pray that the Lord would send his lost sheep from Iran to Armenia so that they would find him, the good shepherd of the sheep, and that he would send these people to our church and to churches like us that are doing these outreaches.
From Iran's border with Armenia, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News.
In Turkey, the need for disaster relief is ongoing and could last for years. CBN's Operation Blessing showed up right after the earthquakes and continues to stay, working to meet the widespread needs. Brody Carter reports from Turkey.
Here in Antakya, families have been forced to leave, seeking refuge elsewhere. But for those who've stayed behind, they're relying on the generosity of others across the globe.
But the reality is these people still have no homes, many of them no jobs because their businesses collapsed. So the effect is not only just that people have lost their homes, but they now have no means to even provide for their family.
There were 4 of us in the room, my husband and I and our children. My husband died, and so did my son.
Trapped under the rubble for more than 130 hours, Turkan is alive to tell her story of survival and face the reality of loss.
I need a helper and a home. I have nothing. With no son alive to work, I have nothing. I need help. We need electricity, water, a bathroom, kitchen.
Necla Adahan recalls running out of her home, not being able to stand, and holding her family for what she thought was the last time.
If I explain the story, I will cry. It was like the apocalypse.
Before receiving temporary housing, Necla and her family survived in this pigeon coop, with roughly 10 others, lighting fires to keep warm. Now it serves as their washroom since their home is too dangerous to enter. Operation Blessing arrived shortly after the first earthquake hit last month. The plan is to stay for at least 6 months, feeding, loving, and helping the people of Turkey any way they can.
We have our major stock is in food boxes that contain kind of your basic commodities of rice, oil, beans, flour, sugar. But we're also starting to hopefully purchase bulk items, as well as we have hygiene kits. So we're purchasing a lot of hygiene items. Our goal is never to push people upon what we believe, but rather to show them what Jesus' love looks like and wait for an opportunity to then talk beyond that.
OB coordinator Benjamin Britton knows disaster relief is often short-lived because stories often disappear quickly from the news cycle. That's why OB is here for the long haul.
The need is astronomical. I've never seen anything like it. And to think that even us being here for 6 months will likely be one of the few at that point. We're really having an impact, but it's not just about the physical impact, but about the spiritual impact, and not only just to those who don't know Jesus, but even just being able to come alongside churches and encourage them and pray for them and show them that they have people thousands of miles away that care about them and are here to support them. That's really the global church, and that's what it's all about.
Reporting in the Republic of Turkey, Brody Carter, CBN News.
Still ahead, Jerusalem's recent successful marathon. Blue skies, happy faces. A blast was had by all. Thousands of runners from across the globe recently came to the Holy Land for Jerusalem's annual marathon. It brought together the young, old, seasoned runners and walkers. Here's a special look from our social media at this exciting event. Well, that's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and you can also access CBN content through our CBN News and other CBN apps. And don't forget to sign up for our email blast so you can continue to receive all of our CBN content. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.